The signal came from a dead satellite spinning far past Pluto, a leftover from an old human mission nobody remembered anymore. A coalition scout ship picked it up by accident. And within a week, 3 warships dropped out of the dark sky above Earth. No warning, no greeting, just a message broadcast on every channel at once, translated instantly into every human language. The message came from a coalition officer named Doran, and the words were simple. He said the coalition had found a new world, home to a species still climbing out of its own violent, primitive past. He called them clever, resourceful, even. Then he called them apes. He didn't say it as an insult on purpose. To him, it was just a fact like calling water wet. Billions of people heard it at the same time. Kids in classrooms, workers in factories, old men in quiet villages, soldiers on patrol. For one strange moment, the entire planet went silent together, and then it didn't. At the United Nations building, a man named Grant sat at the head of a long table, watching the broadcast end. He was not a soldier or a scientist. He worked in diplomacy, dealing with countries that had hated each other for decades. He had seen anger before, but never anything like the tension building in the room. "They think we're animals," said a woman across the table, her voice shaking with fury. Grant didn't answer right away. He turned off the screen and looked around at the faces staring back at him. Representatives from every major country on Earth, people who normally couldn't agree on trade deals or borders, were now sitting together in complete silence. "They're not wrong to think that," Grant finally said. "Not from what they've seen." The room erupted. Grant raised a hand, and slowly, the noise died down. "We've spent 100 years fighting each other," he continued. "2 world wars, countless smaller ones. They looked at our history and saw chaos. They didn't see what we could become if we stopped." Outside, the alien ships hung silently in the sky, visible even during the day, a strange silver shape breaking the clouds. Military bases went on alert worldwide. Fighter jets scrambled uselessly, circling below ships they couldn't hope to touch. Cities panicked. Markets crashed. And yet something else was happening too, quieter but stronger. For the first time in recorded history, people from rival nations began reaching out to each other. Not through their governments, but directly. Scientists from countries that had never cooperated started sharing data. Soldiers from opposing armies exchanged information about the alien ship sizes and movement patterns. It wasn't organized. Nobody planned it. It simply happened. Born from a shared insult that cut deeper than any border ever had. 3 days after the broadcast, a coalition shuttle landed in a wide field outside the UN building. It was smaller than the warships, sleek and eerily quiet as it touched down. From it stepped a diplomat named Ree, tall and thin, with skin like pale gray stone and eyes that never seemed to blink. He walked forward, flanked by 2 guards, expecting to be greeted with fear, maybe worship. Instead, he found Grant waiting for him, calm and steady, along with representatives from every continent standing in a loose semicircle. "Welcome to Earth," Grant said, extending a hand. Ree looked at it for a long moment before understanding the gesture and copying it awkwardly. "You responded quickly," Ree said. "The coalition expected disorganization, fighting among yourselves before any unified response could form." "You'd think that," Grant replied, "if you only looked at our past." Ree tilted his head slightly, an alien gesture that might have meant confusion. "Your species has been observed for weeks. Aggressive tendencies, tribal divisions, primitive weapon systems. The coalition's assessment stands. You are early in your development, comparable in some ways to primates learning tool use." A few people in the crowd stiffened at the word, but nobody spoke. Grant simply nodded as if considering the comparison seriously. "You might be right," he said, "but apes learn fast when they have a reason to." Ree didn't understand the weight behind those words. Not yet. To him, it sounded like nothing more than a polite response from a species trying to save face. He returned to his ship that evening, confident in his report. Humanity was manageable, predictable, and, most importantly, no threat at all. He had no idea that behind closed doors, Engineers were already studying the shuttle's landing gear marks, calculating its weight and thrust. He had no idea that satellite images of his warships were being analyzed frame by teams working around the clock in a dozen countries. He had no idea that the very insult meant to establish dominance had instead planted the first seed of a unity Earth had never managed to achieve on its own. That night, Grant stood alone on a balcony, looking up at the 3 ships still hanging silently above the city. Behind him, aides moved quickly, carrying reports and updates from around the world. He didn't feel afraid. He felt something closer to certainty. The coalition had made a mistake, and it hadn't even realized it yet. Deep inside a coalition relay station orbiting a gas giant 3 systems away, 2 traders argued over the price of rare metals, while a news feed played quietly in the background. The feed showed footage of Earth, its blue oceans and green land, along with a summary of the newly discovered species. Apes with rockets, one trader said, laughing. He was Cyan, an insect-like being with 6 narrow limbs and a chitin shell that clicked when he moved. They still burn fuel to leave their own atmosphere. Barbaric. His partner, a slow-moving aquatic being named for the bubbling sound of her native language but simplified by translators, didn't look up from her work. Every species starts somewhere, she said. Even us. Not like this, the Cyan trader replied. Have you seen their historical records? They fought wars over land, over beliefs, over almost nothing at all. Millions dead, generation after generation. And now the coalition wants to bring them in as a protectorate. Across coalition space, similar conversations played out in council chambers, trade halls, and military briefings. The general opinion was clear. Earth was interesting, strange, occasionally amusing, but ultimately harmless. A species that hadn't even achieved unified government didn't warrant serious concern. Back on Earth, that assumption was being quietly dismantled. In an underground facility built beneath what used to be an old missile silo, Grant met with a small group of advisors, engineers, military strategists, and scientists pulled from a dozen different countries. The room was cramped, filled with monitors displaying fragmented data pulled from every scrap of information available about the coalition ships. They think we're going to fall apart, said a woman named Priya, an aerospace engineer who had spent the last 15 years designing satellites before this. Every report we've intercepted from their diplomatic channel says the same thing. Instability, weak coordination, no real threat. Good, Grant said. Let them keep thinking that. A man near the back of the room, a retired general with gray hair and tired eyes, shook his head. We can't just sit here and let them offer us this protectorate deal. Once we sign, we're under their authority. Every decision runs through their administrator. That's exactly why we sign it, Grant said. The room went quiet. He continued, pacing slowly. They expect us to resist or to collapse trying to resist. If we sign, we look weak, cooperative, exactly what they expect. Meanwhile, we use the access it gives us. Trade agreements mean shared technology, even if it's limited. Aid packages mean equipment on our soil that we can study. And most importantly, it buys us time without anyone firing a single shot. Priya leaned forward. Time to do what exactly? Grant looked at the group, meeting each person's eyes before answering. Time to catch up, maybe even pass them. Over the following weeks, the Unified Earth Assembly formed quietly, built not through political speeches, but through necessity. Countries that had spent decades competing over resources and influence suddenly found common ground in something bigger than themselves. Military budgets that once funded conflicts against each other were redirected. Research teams that once guarded their findings jealously began sharing everything. The change wasn't perfect. Old rivalries didn't disappear overnight. There were arguments, disagreements, and moments where the fragile alliance nearly cracked. But every time tensions rose, someone would replay that first broadcast, the word apes echoing through the room, and the arguments would quiet down. Meanwhile, the coalition prepared its formal offer. A protectorate treaty, dressed in careful diplomatic language, promised protection, guidance, and eventual integration into coalition society, once Earth proved itself capable of following established laws and customs. In exchange, Earth would accept an administrator to oversee its development, along with restrictions on independent military expansion. Ree, still acting as the primary contact, delivered the treaty personally, expecting hesitation, maybe even refusal. Instead, Grant signed it almost immediately with barely any negotiation. Reed returned to the Coalition Council with satisfaction. The humans, he explained, understood their place. They accepted guidance without serious resistance, a clear sign of a species eager to avoid conflict or perhaps simply too disorganized to consider alternatives. The Council approved the treaty without much debate. Earth was added to the growing list of coalition protectorates, filed away as a minor, low-priority world. None of them noticed the quiet shift happening beneath the surface. None of them saw the shared data flowing between countries that had never cooperated before, or the growing pool of resources being redirected toward research programs disguised as agricultural studies and infrastructure projects. The treaty was signed. The coalition believed the matter settled. Grant stood outside the signing ceremony that evening, watching Ree's shuttle lift off and disappear into the clouds. Beside him, Priya crossed her arms, staring at the empty sky. "They really don't see it, do they?" she asked. "No," Grant said quietly. "And that's exactly what we need." The administrator arrived 6 months after the treaty was signed, traveling aboard a modest transport ship rather than a warship, a deliberate choice meant to appear friendly and unthreatening. Her name was Voss, and she had spent nearly 200 years overseeing new protectorate worlds across coalition space. To her, Earth was just another entry in a long career, another primitive world to guide gently toward civilization. She set up her administrative office in a converted building near the coast, choosing the location herself because she found the sound of ocean waves calming. Her staff was small, mostly translators and a few junior coalition officials, along with a handful of automated systems meant to monitor Earth's compliance with treaty terms. Voss treated her assignment with mild amusement. She toured human cities, sampled human food, and even attended a few cultural events, always with the same detached curiosity someone might show when visiting a nature reserve. She found humans oddly charming in their inefficiency, their tendency to build things by hand instead of relying on proper automation, and their strange emotional attachment to physical objects and places. "They remind me of children," she remarked once to an aide, watching a group of human engineers argue passionately over blueprint designs in a research facility she was touring. Enthusiastic but lacking discipline, she approved every research grant request without much scrutiny, viewing them as harmless busywork. Requests for advanced metallurgy studies, propulsion research, and energy shielding experiments were all filed under mundane titles like regional infrastructure development or agricultural equipment modernization. Voss barely glanced at the details before signing off. What she didn't know was that every approved grant fed directly into a classified program hidden across a dozen different countries, coordinated secretly by Grant's growing council. In an underground facility in the mountains, engineers pulled apart fragments of coalition technology included in early aid shipments meant only as goodwill gestures. What the coalition considered outdated scrap, Earth scientists treated as priceless technology, decades ahead of anything humanity had built before. They studied propulsion systems, energy shielding, and communication arrays, taking them apart piece by piece, learning not just how they worked, but why they worked the way they did. Priya led one such team, spending months studying a damaged shield generator recovered from a supply drop. The technology was impressive, but not magical. Once she understood the underlying principles, she realized humanity's own physics wasn't far behind, just less refined and less tested at scale. "They've had centuries to perfect this," she told Grant during one of their regular meetings. "But it's not unreachable. Give us time and we can build something comparable, maybe even better." "How much time?" Grant asked. "With everyone working together like this, less than we'd think." The research moved faster than anyone expected. Countries that once guarded military secrets fiercely now shared breakthroughs freely, driven by a shared purpose stronger than old rivalries. Universities that competed for funding worked side by side. Private companies handed over patents without hesitation. The coalition's own carelessness with technology became humanity's greatest advantage. Beyond the technology itself, Earth scientists noticed something else. Something perhaps even more valuable. Coalition military doctrine, studied through leaked reports and observed patrol patterns, revealed a species that hadn't faced real conflict in generations. Their tactics were standardized, predictable, built for handling minor uprisings among weaker protectorate worlds, not genuine warfare. They fight like they've never had to think, a former general named Okafor said during one strategy meeting. He had spent decades studying military history and recognized complacency when he saw it. Their formations, their response times, everything follows the same old training manual. No creativity, no adaptation. Grant found that observation particularly useful. Humanity's own history was filled with conflict, constant adaptation, and brutal lessons learned through centuries of war. What the coalition saw as savage and primitive, Grant now understood as invaluable experience. Hard-earned knowledge in a species that had rarely known peace long enough to grow complacent. 18 months after the treaty was signed, a small research team gathered at a remote testing site in the desert, watching a sleek, dark shape hover silently above the sand. It wasn't much, barely larger than a small aircraft, built using a mixture of reverse-engineered coalition technology and original human design. But it worked. Its stealth systems, adapted from studying coalition sensor blind spots, kept it completely invisible to any scanning attempt. The engineers erupted into quiet celebration, careful not to draw attention from nearby coalition monitoring stations. Grant watched the test from a secure video feed, allowing himself a small, satisfied smile. Voss, meanwhile, spent that same evening reviewing quarterly reports back at her coastal office, mostly filled with routine compliance updates and harmless research summaries. She signed off on everything without a second glance, then retired early, enjoying the sound of waves outside her window, utterly unaware of what had just been born in the desert hundreds of miles away. Earth was no longer just catching up. It was preparing. The asteroid cluster sat quietly on the edge of the solar system, far enough from Earth that most people never thought about it, yet close enough that a small mining colony had grown there over the past year. It wasn't glamorous work. Miners extracted rare minerals from the rock, shipping them back to Earth for use in the very research programs Voss unknowingly approved. The colony had grown slowly but steadily, protected under the terms of the treaty as legitimate territorial development. A Kayan trade fleet, commanded by a sharp-tempered officer named Breed, arrived without warning one morning, cutting off the colony's supply routes. Breed had grown frustrated watching Earth's mining operation expand into territory his own species had scouted years earlier but never claimed. Protectorate species weren't technically allowed independent expansion without coalition approval. A technicality Breed intended to exploit. "This rock belongs to nobody yet," Breed said over an open channel to the colony below. "The coalition will understand when I explain the apes overstepped their boundaries." The colony's small population, barely 200 people, found themselves suddenly surrounded by 6 armed Kayan vessels. Breed expected quick surrender. Reports on Earth described a species without real military capability, still limited to primitive planetary defenses. He assumed intimidation alone would be enough. He assumed wrong. The colony's defense wasn't obvious at first glance. On the surface, it looked like nothing more than mining equipment and habitat domes. But hidden beneath the rock, connected through tunnels dug during routine excavation work, sat a small garrison equipped with weapons and technology developed during the past 18 months of secret research. When Breed sent a shuttle to formally claim the asteroid, it was met not with surrender, but with a coordinated response that caught his fleet completely off guard. Ground-based defense turrets powered by adapted shielding technology activated the moment the shuttle crossed a certain boundary. Small, agile fighter craft built using stealth systems reverse-engineered from coalition technology emerged from hidden hangars carved into the asteroid itself. Breed's fleet, designed for handling minor uprisings among weaker protectorate worlds, found itself facing tactics it had never encountered before. Instead of a straightforward confrontation, the human defenders used the asteroid's uneven terrain and low gravity to their advantage, striking from unpredictable angles, retreating before Kayan weapons could lock on, then striking again from a different direction entirely. "This is impossible," Breed muttered, watching his fleet formation break apart under the chaotic, unconventional assault. His officers struggled to adapt. Trained only in standardized coalition tactics that assumed a predictable, orderly enemy, the battle lasted less than an hour, but it felt far longer to everyone involved. 2 Kayan ships sustained heavy damage. A third was forced to retreat entirely after its shields failed under a concentrated strike from the colony's defense grid. Human casualties remained low, thanks largely to careful preparation and tunnels that protected most of the population throughout the confrontation. Eventually, Breed ordered a full retreat, unwilling to risk further losses against an enemy that fought nothing like the reports suggested. News of the confrontation reached Administrator Voss within hours, though the initial reports were vague and confused. Breed, embarrassed by the outcome, filed an official account that downplayed the engagement significantly, describing it as a minor territorial misunderstanding rather than admitting his fleet had been outmaneuvered by a supposedly primitive species. Voss, still trusting the general coalition assessment of Earth, accepted the explanation without much investigation. She issued a formal warning to both parties, urging clearer communication regarding territorial claims, and considered the matter resolved. But not everyone accepted Breed's version of events so easily. A handful of Kayan soldiers who survived the engagement spoke privately among trusted colleagues, describing tactics and technology far beyond what should have been possible for a newly discovered protectorate species. Rumors began spreading quietly through certain coalition circles, dismissed by most as exaggeration or embarrassment-driven excuses, but taken seriously by a few sharper minds within the coalition's intelligence networks. Back on Earth, Grant received a full, detailed report of the engagement from the colony's defense commander, a young officer named Reyes, who had overseen the entire operation. "They weren't ready for us," Reyes said during the debriefing, still slightly stunned by how effectively the defense had worked in practice. "Everything we trained for, everything we built, it worked exactly like we hoped." Grant listened carefully, weighing the significance of what had just happened. This wasn't just a successful defense. It was proof, real and undeniable proof, that Earth's preparation over the past 18 months hadn't been wasted effort or wishful thinking. "This stays quiet," Grant said finally. "No public celebration, no leaks, nothing that draws unnecessary attention." He understood something crucial that Breed's humiliated retreat had confirmed. The coalition's confidence rested entirely on outdated assumptions about humanity, assumptions increasingly disconnected from reality. As long as those assumptions remained unchallenged publicly, Earth could continue preparing, growing stronger with each passing month. That night, Grant stood before his council once more, sharing the full details of the confrontation. The mood in the room was different this time. Less cautious optimism, more quiet confidence. "They're not as strong as everyone thinks," a coffer said, studying the tactical reports from the engagement. "Comfortable, yes. Overconfident, yes, but not strong, not really." Grant nodded slowly, already thinking ahead to what would inevitably come next. The coalition would eventually learn the truth. The only question left was how much time remained before that happened and whether Earth would be ready when it did. The rumors that started among a handful of embarrassed Kayan soldiers eventually reached someone who took them seriously. Her name was Sela, an auditor working for the coalition's oversight division, tasked with investigating inconsistencies across protectorate worlds. She had built her reputation on catching small discrepancies that others overlooked, the kind of details bureaucrats usually dismissed as unimportant. When Breed's official report about the asteroid incident crossed her desk, something about it felt wrong. The language was vague in places that should have been specific, and casualty figures didn't quite match supply requisition records filed afterward. Curious, she requested permission to travel to Earth personally, officially to review Administrator Voss's compliance reports, unofficially to satisfy her own growing suspicion. Voss welcomed her without concern, viewing the visit as routine oversight, nothing more. She gave Sela full access to her records, confident there was nothing to hide. After all, every research grant, every trade agreement, every development project had been approved through proper channels. Sela began her investigation exactly where bureaucrats always did, buried in paperwork. She reviewed years of research grants, comparing approved budgets against actual spending, tracking material shipments against stated purposes. Individually, each report looked harmless. Together, patterns started forming that troubled her deeply. Too much refined metal ordered for supposed agricultural projects. Energy consumption figures far higher than infrastructure development should require. Shipping manifests listing equipment types inconsistent with their official destinations. Small inconsistencies, easy to miss individually but impossible to ignore once she started connecting them. She requested a tour of several research facilities listed in the reports, expecting Voss's staff to arrange convenient, sanitized visits showing exactly what officials wanted her to see. What she found instead were facilities far more advanced than agricultural or infrastructure work required, staffed by scientists who grew visibly nervous under her questioning. At one facility, officially disguised as a satellite communications research center, she noticed shielding technology mounted on testing equipment far beyond anything a protected species should possess independently. When she asked directly about its origin, the lead scientist stumbled through an unconvincing explanation before excusing himself entirely. Sella didn't confront Voss immediately. Instead, she requested a private meeting with Grant, choosing to approach the situation carefully rather than triggering immediate alarm through official channels. They met in a quiet room away from Voss's offices. Just the two of them and a single translator device between them. "Your research programs," Sella began without preamble. "They're not what they claim to be." Grant studied her carefully before responding. "No," he admitted simply. "They're not." The directness surprised her. Most species, when caught, attempted denial or elaborate justification. Grant offered neither. "Why?" she asked. "Your treaty offered protection, stability, eventual integration. Why risk everything by hiding this level of development?" Grant considered the question seriously before answering. "Have you studied our history? Actually studied it beyond the summary reports your council reviewed before signing that treaty?" "Some," Sella admitted. "Then you know we've spent our entire existence fighting to survive," Grant continued. "Fighting each other, fighting disease, fighting scarcity, fighting anything that threatened us. Every time someone decided we were finished, weak, easily controlled, we found a way to prove them wrong. That's not aggression. That's who we are." Sella remained silent, processing his words carefully. "When your coalition arrived," Grant continued, "you called us apes. Maybe you didn't mean it as an insult. Maybe it was simply how your scientists categorized us. But you have no idea what that word means in our history. How many times we've been called less than human by people who wanted to control us, and how many times we proved them catastrophically wrong." "You're preparing for conflict," Sella said quietly. It wasn't quite a question. "We're preparing to never be underestimated again," Grant corrected. "There's a difference." Sella left that conversation more conflicted than she had been in years. Her duty demanded she report everything immediately, alerting the Coalition Council to a protectorate species secretly developing military capability far beyond treaty allowances. Yet something about Grant's calm certainty, his complete lack of aggression despite everything he had just admitted, made her hesitate. She spent 3 days drafting her official report, rewriting it repeatedly before finally submitting a version that included only partial findings, enough to satisfy procedural requirements without revealing the full scope of what she had discovered. She wasn't sure why she chose restraint over full disclosure. Perhaps it was simple curiosity about how this would unfold. Perhaps it was something closer to respect. The partial report still caused alarm when it reached the Coalition Council. Hardline factions, already suspicious after the asteroid incident, seized upon Sella's findings as confirmation that Earth represented a growing risk rather than a harmless protectorate species. Voices calling for immediate, decisive action grew louder within council chambers. Among those voices was Doran, the same commander who had delivered Earth's first, insulting introduction to coalition space. He argued forcefully that allowing a protectorate species to develop independent military capability, however limited, set a dangerous precedent that other worlds might attempt to follow. The council debated for weeks, eventually reaching a decision that would set events in motion neither side could easily reverse. A full battle fleet would be dispatched to Earth, not for negotiation, but to demonstrate decisively and permanently exactly where humanity stood in the coalition's hierarchy. Sela watched the decision get finalized with a growing sense of unease, wondering if her hesitation had bought Earth valuable time, or simply delayed an inevitable confrontation that was always going to happen eventually. Word of the approaching fleet reached Earth through Sela herself, who sent a quiet, unofficial warning to Grant 3 days before the official coalition announcement. It wasn't much time, but it was enough for a species that had spent nearly 2 years preparing for exactly this possibility. Grant activated the full readiness protocol that same night, a plan developed and refined over countless meetings, simulations, and quiet arguments about worst-case scenarios. Military installations across the globe transitioned from research and development to active deployment. The stealth fleet, built in secret and tested carefully over the previous months, the stealth fleet moved into position at the edge of the solar system, hidden among asteroid fields and the natural debris of space. Administrator Voss learned about the approaching fleet at the same time as the general public, receiving an official coalition transmission informing her that a corrective deployment was being sent to address treaty violations. She read the message twice, confused and increasingly alarmed, before requesting an emergency meeting with Grant. "Explain this to me," she said, holding up a data pad displaying the Council's formal announcement. "Explain what I clearly failed to notice happening under my own supervision." Grant met her gaze steadily. "You saw exactly what we let you see," he said. "Nothing more." Voss stared at him for a long moment, processing not just the deception, but the sheer scale of it. Months upon months of careful, deliberate misdirection had happened right beneath her administrative oversight. "They're sending a full battle fleet," she said finally. "You understand what that means. You understand what they're capable of." "We have a fairly good idea," Grant replied calmly. "We've been studying your technology for almost 2 years now." Voss said nothing further, retreating to her offices, uncertain whether to feel angry, betrayed, or something far more complicated as she watched Earth's military mobilize with efficient, practiced coordination that no primitive species should have possessed. The coalition fleet arrived 4 days later, 12 warships emerging from faster-than-light travel just beyond Earth's moon, commanded personally by Doran. He expected the same passive, disorganized response the initial contact had suggested nearly 2 years earlier. Instead, his sensors immediately detected an unexpected coordinated presence waiting for his arrival. Human ships, nearly 40 of them, ranging from small fighters to several larger vessels roughly comparable in size to coalition cruisers, emerged from hidden positions around the solar system, forming a defensive perimeter that made retreat difficult and advance costly. "Impossible," Doran muttered, staring at sensor readings that contradicted everything his intelligence briefings had promised. The battle that followed unfolded nothing like coalition military doctrine anticipated. Trained for generations to face predictable, standardized opponents, Doran's forces struggled against human tactics built from centuries of hard-earned experience in unconventional warfare. Human ships used unpredictable, aggressive maneuvers, striking from multiple directions simultaneously, retreating before counterattacks could land, then striking again from entirely different angles. Coalition shielding technology, while individually superior to human equivalents, proved less effective against coordinated, overwhelming strikes targeting the same weak points repeatedly. Human commanders studying coalition formations during the earlier asteroid engagement had identified critical vulnerabilities that standardized coalition tactics failed to address. 2 hours into the engagement, 3 coalition warships had sustained critical damage. A 4th had been disabled entirely, drifting powerless while its crew evacuated to nearby vessels. Doran, watching his carefully planned demonstration of coalition dominance collapse into chaotic, humiliating disorder, finally ordered a full retreat. As his remaining ships withdrew toward the edge of the solar system, Doran received an unexpected transmission request from Grant himself, broadcast directly to his command vessel. "This doesn't need to continue," Grant said simply, his voice steady despite everything happening around him. "We're not interested in destroying your fleet. We're interested in you understanding something clearly." Doran, humiliated and furious, remained silent, listening despite himself. "You called us apes," Grant continued. Maybe that word means something different in your language, something less insulting than it does in ours. But we've spent our entire history being told we're lesser, being told we don't deserve equal treatment, being told to accept whatever position stronger powers decide for us. Every single time, we prove that assumption wrong. He paused briefly before continuing. We don't want war with your coalition. We never did, but we will never again accept being treated as less than equal. The transmission ended there, leaving Doran with a difficult decision. Continuing the engagement risked losing additional ships against an enemy that had already proven far more capable than any intelligence report suggested. Retreating entirely, however, meant returning to the Coalition Council with undeniable proof that their assessment of Earth had been catastrophically wrong. He chose retreat, ordering his surviving fleet back toward Coalition space, carrying with him data that would reshape how the Coalition viewed humanity permanently. In the weeks that followed, formal negotiations began. This time, they were conducted as discussions between equals rather than a protectorate treaty imposed on a supposedly primitive species. The Coalition Council, faced with undeniable proof of Earth's capabilities, agreed to renegotiate humanity's status entirely, offering full membership rather than continued protectorate oversight. Administrator Voss remained on Earth throughout the transition, her role shifting gradually from overseer to liaison, watching with quiet fascination as the species she once viewed as primitive children proved themselves capable of far more than anyone in Coalition space had ever imagined. Grant stood once more on that same balcony where he'd watched the first Coalition ships arrive nearly 2 years earlier, looking up at a sky no longer threatening, but filled instead with possibility. Across Coalition space, a quiet warning began spreading among traders, diplomats, and military officers alike, whispered carefully between species who had learned an important lesson the hard way. Never call the apes weak. They remember every word, and eventually, they always prove you wrong.